Hello everybody, welcome to WhatCulture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Josh.
Hello.
And we're going to debate Gears 5.
I'm excited for this
because
one.
we're on two different sides of the old fence. Now, at the minute Josh has finished it, I'm quite near the end of Act 3 as far as I know, which is there is 4 acts in total for Gears 5. But yeah, we might go into spoilers. We'll see how we go.
I'll try not to because obviously you haven't finished
We
it.
can do some early game stuff, potentially. We'll see how we go. But it seems that the fandom is sort of split at the minute anyway. If you sort of have a look around on the likes of Reddit or the likes of social media or whatever, people seem to be in two different camps. Mainly because the Gears 5 sort of takes some new approaches to content in general. There's some open world segments. Act 2 and Act 3 are, they're full of side missions and collectibles and things, all set around these big sort of open plains, which is kind of anathema to what a lot of people associate with Gears of War as this really straightforward, visceral, bloody ass shooter. So I really am kind of thinking it's bland as hell, but you're loving it.
See, this hurts me because we've had many arguments about this off screen so far because I beat it last night. And I
came in, I said, Josh.
You did. You grabbed me by the scruff of my neck and you went, Josh, it's not the best one. And I was screaming, you know what? It might be the best Gears of War game because I actually really love it. It's not its flaws. It's not a perfect game. I have especially a lot of issues with Act 3 and how that plays out. But for me, it does so much new. And after Gears of War 4, which I liked but didn't love, I just thought this has given Gears a reason to exist again. After 4, it felt like they were kind of scrambling to find a new story, find new characters. And for me, 5 is the realization of that. It's the story coming into focus. It's these characters coming into their own and actually being compelling in the mechanics themselves, how they've opened up into the kind of open world aspects, which aren't as well done as a game like God of War, but are still interesting and add a lot of variety to the classic Gears formula. When you still get for me, it's the best of both worlds. You get a newfound freedom alongside the on-rails linear set-piece driven gameplay like Gears does so well.
I think we need to pass these things out.
Yes.
So first up, you mentioned the characters that you like, all the comparisons to Gears of War 4. I totally with you. I thought the Gears 4 was mostly forgettable. I really didn't like JD that much. I thought he just felt like a Nolan North ripoff or like a Nathan Drake sort of stand-in. Kind of what they were going for. It's a very corporate way to do a protagonist. Like we see them in the likes of Mass Effect Andromeda or Anthem or whatever. It's sort of quip-happy characters that anybody can get on board with. It's mainstream. It's really accessible and approachable and whatever. That was JD to a T for me. Pleasant enough and serviceable, but meh and forgettable. I would say that was the vast majority of Gears 4. By the end of that game, when everyone else came in, the old school characters came in, just reminded me how much more personality those guys have. And I just wanted to play with Marcus, Dom, Bed, and Cole. And so in Gears 5, they do, with the characters, they bring Marcus and the old crew a bit more back in. You're always hanging with Marcus, at least in the first act. But the thing that I'm going to counter that with is that in Act 2, it splits off and you start playing as Kate and Del. And I quite like Kate. I think that she has a nice amount of drive. She obviously wants to find out why the pendant that's been given to her at the end of Gears 4 has the same symbol as the Locust and what's her grandma's relationship to the Locust, etc. That's a nice driving force kind of thing. But I think Del and JD and Faz are just the blandest people you could do. Like Del especially. Every single conversation that Kay has with Del is you couldn't quote it right now. There's not a thing that Del says that is worthwhile.
I disagree. Just because I can't quote it doesn't mean it's not interesting or good. I think the dynamics that Kate and Del actually have, they're cool and they offer a good contrast between JD and Foz especially. For me, Del is the weaker character because he's kind of there just to be a sort of hero, a kind of like bastion of good and a moralistic character. He's one-dimensional kind of to a fault, but that's not a problem in my eyes because everyone else around him is so interesting. JD especially. I love the stuff they do with him, especially at the end of Act 1. They take some genuine risks that I didn't expect. They kind of
Max Payne 3.
They do kind of Max Payne 3 and they cast him in this unheroic light and they have him reckoning with, the legacy of his father and who he's supposed to be. And I love how well drawn that is. For me, I could have done with more of that stuff going into the rest of the acts. But for me, that just kind of sets him up as a much more interesting character. And Kate herself, I think, she's obviously like the new protagonist. You play as her for the majority of the game. And I feel like she's really well-rounded as well. I couldn't even remember what she did in the first game, in Gears of War 4. But here she has a compelling story with her mother and her connection to the Locust and stuff like that. And I feel like in Act 2, even though it potentially loses focus because it goes more open world and more freeform, it's still driven by that story. And I was excited to see where that went next and the revelations that came from it.
Same in terms of I was excited to see where it went. That's why there's 2 points to this, because that's why I think Act 2 is weird, because they established that Kate's going to go off and find the reason behind the whole pendant that she has and the whole explanation behind, the Locust and Queen Mirror and everything else, that stuff's great. But the way that that's presented in the game is that you just do like 4 fetch quests because you need to go and like access these different comms towers to finally get to this lab, which lets them do the open world stuff. But you're literally you're going to a place, you're flicking a switch, you ride somewhere else, you flick another switch. And it's like, I just had that realization where I was like, Gears isn't built for this. Like, it's not, it's not a looter shooter. It doesn't have enough components to it where you can split them along an open world. And the way that Gears 5 does it is that you're looking for components to upgrade Jack, your little floating droid guy that can cloak you or do different abilities. And they're fine enough. Like, they're kind of worthwhile or whatever, but like, they're not fundamental. Like, you can get the cloaking ability and maybe you can sneak up on a Locust if you go around the side of them or whatever. I wish that they'd put more impetus on the actual mechanics of battle. Like, when they brought in, you can pull a Locust from over cover and then stab them. You can do these sort of different mechanics in combat that meaningfully change what Gears combat is. That's the stuff that I think they needed to do more of. And by having this like side stuff and then spreading it across a whole open landscape, that just made me go like, I just want this. I want the combat.
Right.
Like our whole thing with Battle Royale.
Man.
Whenever we play a Battle Royale game, like you have a decent encounter with another player. And for the most part, in something like Apex Legends, you fight a different player and you go, and then it ends and you survive and you keep going. You're back into exploring everywhere. And you go, man, that reminded me how good combat is. And I just want a game that does combat. And so like, I know me and you have agreed before that we just ended up going to play Titanfall 2 instead. And so with Gears, every time it clicks and it's Gears combat, which I'll give you, Gears 5 combat as the core combat is the best combat it's been. Well, for the most part, in terms of the mechanics and the way that it feels and stuff. Sound effects are a bit different or whatever. That stuff's fine. But every time you have one of these little side encounters, I just want more. I want the game. I want it to be a Gears game. I don't want it to be this weird Arkham City approach where they take Gears combat and then scatter it across an open world, which is only in 2 of the acts, but that's half the game.
See, this is where I don't think we'll ever be able to reconcile and agree, because for me, when I got to those pockets of side missions or main missions in that open world, the Gears combat was still there in all of its glory. It still felt fully fleshed out. When I think back to my time with Gears 5, a lot of the combat encounters I remember fondly are the ones in those side missions. I remember holding off, a kind of position against waves of waves of the swarm while they're on a sort of, precarious icy lake, and I'm shooting the lake out from under them and they're falling in. Like, it's those moments which come from the side missions that I actually found really engaging and offered a more free-form approach to Gears combat, because although the tight set pieces are what it does best, here I found like getting out by the skin of my teeth and improvising, and it was my own sort of ingenuity or my own kind of creativity when it comes creativity when it comes to like the mechanics that got me out of those situations, and it was me driving them, and that's what did it well.
Why couldn't all those segments be stitched together for a brilliant shooting campaign?
Because you get
what's the benefit of the open world?
Because here we go, this is what I was going to touch upon actually. This is my major disagreement with you when it comes to the open world, because you were saying there that there isn't much to find out there. There are more components, you get to upgrade Jack, and that's not interesting. That's not compelling to me. That's not the driving force of why I was doing that. But what is interesting, for the first time ever, I felt like the Gears world felt lived in and alive. Like, not necessarily alive, but certainly lived in. I felt like it had way more history that was happening right now, rather than I was just walking through these corridors and uncovering a civilization that was around years ago, or events that happened years ago that weren't really relevant to it now. I felt like people actually lived in this world, and that I was, helping to protect them and save them. In the Ice chapter, especially, chapter 2, the little stories kind of strewn around the battlefield. That was why I was exploring. When I was getting off my my skiff or whatever it's called to investigate like little sort of broken down cars and looking at dead bodies in the back and reading through the collectibles, I thought, this is strange. I've never done this in a Gears game before. I've never been this interested in the ancillary lore in the same way I was with Gears 5.
I mean, it's true. They do a lot of noun work, a lot of BioWare style, like this. This is a digger, and this is from this place, and this is what this race was, and whatever. Like, that stuff's great. But I mean, those things were always in the novels. Like, if you wanted to go get lost in the Gears lore, you can go do that. Like, and it's fine. You can have those things in a main campaign, but I think it distracts. Like, I think it fundamentally distracts from what Gears is and why people fell in love with that series, when you're literally taking us out of the loop, the gameplay loop, to go use a skiff to get to the next engaging segment. Like, it's not that those segments aren't phenomenal. It's that they're so brilliant. I want a whole game of that, like what Gears of War is. And like, it's so aggressively fine. That's the thing. Like, the dialogue is so fine. The characters are like fine. Everything's serviceable. And like, it matches up to what Ron Ferguson said before it came out, where he was just like, we're going to make a game that is more accessible. We're going to make something. Gears of War is a hardcore franchise. We're going to make something that's way more accessible to more people. And totally that's what they've done. They've smoothed off all the edges and they've made it this like pristine corporate approach. It just feels like there's it's like I said, smoothed over disc of a product, whereas Gears used to have like an attitude and an identity and a personality and like a visceral factor that like isn't really there anymore because it's all kind of just pristine and separated out and like, oh, have a bit, go get your side mission and whatever. And it's not that those things aren't well done enough. It's just that it just feels like it jars. Like it's got this really great personality. It's like Arkham City. It's my problem with Arkham City as to why I think Arkham Asylum is a better game. It's tighter, it's more focused. It hits the highs and it keeps you going. This, when I got after Act 2, because you get a big old lore dump at the end of Act 2, and I was like, I'm good. I could not play the rest of this game and I'm fine. Like, they've answered the big questions that were going in. You get that stuff. At the start of Act 3, it's like, here's another open world. Go do all this stuff again. I'm like,
I will agree that Act 3 for me is a problem because you lose the story focus that Act 2 has and what kept all of those disparate elements gelling for me. But I know what you're saying, and I kind of see it as well, because I do think when Gears 5 is firing on all cylinders, it's in Act 1 and Act 4.
1 is so good.
When you get those, really railroady set piece moments where everything is so focused and so tight. But I wonder if it's just, I don't know if that could have sustained a whole game again, like a whole game of just that going full throttle. I feel like the breathing room here was very much welcome because I got to know the characters in a way that I might not have if it was just all pedal to the metal.
See, my thing is that because you mentioned like you experimented and you like used your own ingenuity to get through some combat set pieces, and the way that they give you when it does focus on itself, especially in Act 1 or when you get to those little side missions that have these little pockets of combat, like you do instinctively think like, okay, well I can go around the side, I can pop this ability, I can go over here, I can use the sniper rifle to pick off some guys from afar or whatever. You're thinking in a way that worked for those original games. So for me, it would just be, why not stitch all those things together? Like I don't see what you gain by splitting it all up. Right. And so like I would totally say that it would absolutely sustain a full game. If you stitched all of Gears 5 together, you'd have an incredibly paced game. Like, the story's still there, the combat's still there, all the new abilities are still there in terms of all the stuff that Jack does. I just don't get what they get by splitting it up. And then obviously for me, it's hampered like sort of threefold by reminding me how much personality the old characters had and just how nothing is there for Del, JD, and Faz. Yeah. Like, Kate's kind of there, but even she is, for the most part, responding to bland, terrible jokes that everyone else says, and then she gets to go, oh God, okay, like whatever. And it's like, we've seen this, we've seen these setups, they've been done to death. Like, that's the stuff that always grinds me down. It just reminds me how amazing those original games were.
Yeah. See, I always wonder whether I've romanticized the original 3 games in my head, because number 2 is probably the game I've replayed the most.
I go back to 2 and 3 like every year.
I used to play that so much with my friends. Every single time they were around, we would play through Gears 2. And I've gone back to Gears 1. I've started playing through them again last night. And there are just some subtle refinements to Gears 5's like formula, and when it comes to mechanics and kind of like the dynamics between the characters that are similar, but they just feel, to me, a bit more robust. Like, even though I know you don't like much of the supporting cast,
they're just fine. But no one's going to be talking about them in a month.
I would kind of disagree with this.
I hope so.
I like that. I like the way, particularly how they. For me, I think it's such a difficult thing to introduce new characters when you still have the older generation around. We've seen that in movies, particularly, whether it's Independence Day or Star Wars. But when it comes to the introduction of new characters against that old blood, for me, Gears 5 kind of has the perfect synergy. Because although I do pop every single time the Coal Train pops up, in a giant mech suit or whatever, for me, the connection that they have to the new blood is far more fleshed out and far more robust and far more compelling, especially between Marcus and JD as the game gets into its later stages. I love how that kind of relationship blossoms, and again how the burden of legacy and what JD is trying to live up to is constantly eating away at him. It just makes it more interesting. And although I do love the original 3 Gears games, for me, the characters there were still a bit one-dimensional.
That's the thing, though. You've only exemplified my point, because the most interesting stuff is relating to the old characters, what you do with them. It's God of War. Like, if you take an old cast, and like you said, like, it's hard introducing a new generation of characters to an old god, but 2 examples of characters that do it extremely well is Star Wars, or in the likes of Creed. I mean, I always forget the dude's name. I think it's like Adonis Creed or whatever. Great name. But though his relationship with Rocky is brilliantly handled, and they slowly segue over to his full story, but they still have Rocky in the background. And in this, like you said, the most interesting stuff is the relationship between JD and Father Marcus. Father Marcus. And it's like, that stuff's great. So just do the Expendables and have the old school crew and have a tight, focused campaign, God of War style with Marcus. Maybe you can do the stuff from the other side of it. Like, there's so much narrative potential, and I think they do go there in certain spots. My problem is with the way that it's laid out. It's the way that they take something that is so refined and is so easily playable. And like I said, the combat it might be smoothed off and everything, but it's incredibly playable. Gears is a legendary gameplay formula, and it totally works. But they just kind of do this weird bland approach where it feels like they were responding to sort of marketing or corporate whims to be like, well, we should have an open world segment. I guess that's what people do now. And it's like, yeah, it's fine, but it doesn't serve Gears. It doesn't serve anything in the core of what Gears of War used to be or is.
Well, that's an interesting point because I feel like we do need a break from what Gears of War was or used to be. I think having the old guard around is fine, but I don't want another game starring Marcus and, old Cole in old bed. This is a new world. This is a new generation of heroes. I want to know what happens to them. I don't want them to keep going back to the same old conflicts, and I think they work better in a supporting cast to reflect the younger blood in the same way that the old cast works in Star Wars.
Yeah.
And the new blood for you might not be that interesting to follow. But for me, they are.
Well, no, it would be if they were written well. If they were dealing with, if all of the characters had more of what JD's relationship to Marcus is, or more about living up to the legacy of. I mean, they kind of have that. That stuff's embedded in the game in terms of what the COG represent and everything. It's not like the Gears of War fandom was sitting around going, "Oh God, the COG are a bit bad."
Yeah,
that's a weird thread to do, but I guess it's fine. But it's just that, like, for me, like I said, look at God of War. Like for me, there is way more furtive ground in Uncharted 4. There is way more furtive ground in taking an established character and what is it like them realizing they're too old to be a video game character anymore, and then you segue it into the new blood and you pass the torch and you do it that way.
Yeah.
Like that's why God of War and Uncharted 4, they're so memorable. Even Arthur Morgan in Red Dead passing it down to John Marston.
Yeah.
Like for me, that's way more interesting. And if you're going to do the new generation, that's cool too. But write them better than Johnny quips a lot.
My counter to this would be, this might be my final counter because I feel like we're just going at each other now.
We've kind of done a lovely little mini podcast.
Adonis in Creed 2.
I know.
I think my issue with that would be that we've already had that focus in all of those games you mentioned. So if Gears does it now, does it not just feel like they're kind of following suit and gone, oh, well, God of War's reinvented a character like this, Uncharted 4's dealt with a character like this, I guess we've got to do it too. For me, it's more interesting that, Gears doesn't do that, and they do relegate, Marcus, Baird to sort of like the secondary characters and allow the new blood to shine. For me, you can still get the reflexive kind of interrogation of those characters without playing as them.
I mean, I guess so. I think for me, it's just that I'm not convinced by the new blood as much. I like what they're trying to do with Kate, but I don't think it. I just think it could be written better. There's obviously the whole wish list route of like, well, I wish they did X, Y, Z. But taking the game as it is, I just think that it gets in its own way too much.
Yeah.
And that's kind of my main problem with it. But in the spirit of letting the new blood shine, we can let people argue this out down in the comments below. Where did you come down on Gears 5 and how much have you been playing? And what do you sort of expect from a Gears game and how comfortable were you with the new directions and stuff? For now though, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com.
I mean, Josh from WhatCulture.com.
I will catch you next time.
Bye.